Okay, are you ready for this? Are you sure? So, I had actually streamed a reading of Risk Taking, but, luckily, I was thinking about this, I was just walking back here, and a couple things where I was thinking, well, it's pretty good that nobody sees these live because, I was pretty heated on that one. I took it down. And these both the interruptions and stressors and even getting into the holding patterns is, like the third hub is like so heated and I'm feeling that. Like as I'm reading these, like I got a little spicy and I just immediately was like, "Ugh, I don't know." So I took it down. And I'm glad I did. I'm actually not probably gonna rewatch it because I think I understand the source of the agina. But so this section that we're going to read here is risk taking. And the section that comes next is the inner and outer critics, which is so important. And I'll say this has been coming up as the practice matures, as more people are doing it, as the conversations are happening. This is becoming the critic becomes increasingly important. So I'm going to do this risk taking. It's relatively short in terms of the passage, and then I'm going to like bleep off, and then I'm going to do bleep off. I'm going to log up, and then I'm going to do the inner and outer critic as a separate section. So risk taking. So when I did the thing for the overachievement cycle, risk taking is part of that because taking calculated risks, daring to like the courage, bravery, all this stuff. Like risk taking is really an important part of like a really like dynamic like I'll call it healthy. I kind of try to stay away from that word. Third hub. And now this is risk taking when it's kind of like, I guess, like in an adapted form and in the shadow is self-destruction. So it's like taking risks without accountability, taking risks that impact other people, and in a way where you're not going to actually have to take responsibility for the impact. And what we're talking about here is risks that we understand, but we can emotionally balance and also have the confidence and self worth to really be able to steer through them. And so, back to the overachievement cycle with risk taking, is that it's like the motor is running and it's revving, but it's almost like there's like a foot on the brake and the ignition's in neutral. And your power is for creating like acceleration, evolution, whatever, and even an aspect of like steering, but I think some of that can be more like from desire and second hub. So I'm going to read this. And it's relatively short, and probably as good a time as any to bring something up here is that these topics as sections, found throughout the composed of all the book, they're like containers. And I look at it like I like put something in the container, but it's a little bit of like a placeholder for the topic, and the exploration of the particular topic it is ongoing and evolving, and certainly subject to one's own direct experience with it. So I think as this grows and evolves, that will be able to be there'll be more live discussion on this. And And I think that type of discussion helps even like kind of mature a parinama practice is to be able to really dynamically interact with these topics as they fit in the frameworks. But for now, I will just read and we'll take it from there. So, okay, so risk taking. So, the shrinking adaptation hides from failure and the inflating runs from it. Beep. Both adaptations are terrified that making mistakes invalidate them. Folks with a dynamic, relatively balanced sense of personal power and strong self esteem can take responsibility for mistakes and have a healthy relationship with risk. Shrinking behavior is indecisive and seeks validation for even minor decisions. It's nervous about making a wrong move. These folks tend to hope someone will give them guidance or take responsibility if things go wrong. Yeah, look, I'm actually going to pause on that. The thing about hoping other people will take responsibility for when things go wrong, this is another area where it's like for I so I in early pretty early in my career, certainly very early in my leadership career, I was working in a company where my career had ascended so far beyond what I had thought for myself, like what I had aspired for. It actually had like grown past, it's like in and it was really like and so what I had achieved and like I want to think of a way to like really consolidate this. So bear with me. So my self-esteem at the time was so low. My confidence was high in my ability to do the job, to perform the function. My self-esteem was so low that I couldn't believe that I was part of what was special about what I had created. So I was struggling because I believed that I had to stay in an environment that no longer suited me and was actually causing a lot of internal distress. And my fear had been, and it didn't feel like fear at the time, it felt like the truth. It's one of the things about adaptations. And that I could never get that, like it had been an accident that I'd succeeded and that I could never do better. And but I knew I had to leave because it was kind of like destroying parts of me. Like I was becoming I was crawling through life. It's really, really barely functional. And the thing is that I couldn't be fired. Like they wouldn't let me go. Like there was nothing I could do. I mean, it was just like so extreme. Like how, I mean, and this is like there was obviously some dissonance there in terms of my being able to see that. But also some very real things about how I was being treated, which, in these situations, there's a lot of dynamism where it's not all just sort of like swimming in one direction. And that sort of like any sort of contrary, flow can create confusion if you do not have a very like strong internal sense of self. So it's like when we're externally seeking our sense of power and our sense and really our self-esteem, it's kind of like the problem with that is that like whatever's happening outside us is defining what that is. So it's like it creates like this, pretty frothy um time of one's life. And so anyway, I'm taking like the long route apparently to get to this story, but one of the things that I started doing was in meetings, I wanted to be out so badly that I started kind of I bait them, you know? I bait them, I tell them. I'd try to do things that were really subtle and, you know, yeah, like I think I remember one time I was like, "I'll help you fire me." And it took me a while to understand that I was trying to make them take responsibility for a decision I needed to make. That if in the realization that arose, and this is like 15 years ago now, I realized what was happening because I thought, what's going on here? It's like taking this risk of leaving this situation that was better than anything I knew could be possible for me. And it was a really special time, but we were changing and and things were happening within the organization that were changing the organization in a way that was making it, have a very negative impact on me. And I realized what I was doing was I was trying to make them responsible. So if it was in fact, and bear with me on this, I don't know if this might make sense for some people and others, that I was like, if I forced their hand, then I could be the victim. If I forced their hand to make a move on me, if I did, and I honestly didn't do anything too disruptive, but I was making like sort of moves, like indicating that, and thinking a lot about it, like how could I get them to, whatever. It wasn't going to happen. Out of like almost 1,000-person company, I was ranked by the executive board as like one of the top 3 most valuable people in the company. Um, it wasn't. I mean, and also I'm not an asshole. So there really are like a lot of guardrails about like my own behavior, about what I'd be willing to do. But my conflict remained, which was that that I like what I was doing subconsciously is I was like, well, if they were the ones who took me out of this, then if it turns out that, maybe that it can't ever happen again, and this was a fluke, and it turns out I am unworthy, that I hadn't I hadn't flipped the kill switch, like that I hadn't self-destructed myself, that I hadn't walked away from the greatest opportunity of my life, and that it was like, and just the realization that I was doing that was the reconciliation that actually led me to resign. And that's a whole other story because I resigned and then they made me, a counter offer, which is a whole other story that's very funny. And that actually made me all the kind of have at least some level of self-awareness breakthrough. Not a huge one, but a little teasing open. But anyway, so the thing about taking risks is taking responsibility. It's taking responsibility. And the thing in and the factors that impact the ability to do that are related to self-esteem. Self-esteem, self-worth. So, as stated here in this book, I think like, confidence and self-esteem are sort of interchangeably used. And what I would say and how I position it is that confidence in specific abilities and skills, and self-esteem or self-worth is just a holistic sense of your value, and being even able to integrate confidence to a certain extent, like in the right sized amounts into like one's sense of self. So, oh, and I was reading. I stopped reading. Oh my god. Okay. So, all right. So I'm going to kind of like rewind here. So these folks tend to hope someone will give them guidance or take responsibility if things go wrong. So, and this is the shrinking. So they may crave power and or resent it in others. Yet the idea of taking responsibility for negative consequences is an overwhelming proposition for them. Risk aversion is common in shrinking and inflating adaptations. It's understandable to believe that risk aversion isn't a factor in the confident appearance of folks with inflating third hub adaptations. Keep in mind that in the overachieving cycle above, risk aversion is fear of negative consequences and outrunning failure, which is central to the inflating adaptation and is concealed in behavior that masquerades as confidence. Taking responsibility and withstanding criticism is an expression of authentic power. So, yeah. Yeah, and I think that probably the notion of the adaptations is really circles around, um, first of all, like, the relative strength, the development of the particular hub. So there is a component to it of its like kind of like health. Once again, I'm using that word. So it's like kind of it's that it's been developed because there are folks with certain hubs where, especially in like second hub, where shrinking is like also underdevelopment, or it becomes atrophy, right? So maybe that's how that relation happens. And in the third hub, and I can say this for myself, and I'm kind of thinking about my own um, reconciliation in this hub, is that you can be both. In all the hubs, you can have both adaptations. And like what we're really looking for is to be emanating from the inside and to be able to be dynamically responsive. So to be able to like show up and respond according to what a situation or a circumstance kind of provides us. So if we have a fixed response, like we're immediately defensive no matter what arises. We're defending ourselves, we're protecting ourselves, or like whatever. Like what we're trying to do is there are times to be defensive, you know? There are times to be defensive. It's just like the frozenness of having this default adaptation that doesn't naturally adjust to the conditions and then as a result informs the quality of our life in a way that is largely negative once these adaptations start to really calcify. So, yeah. Anyway, I'm going to wrap here and I'm going to hop over to the next one. So stay tuned. I'll see you on the other side. Bye for this second.